Want to test it? Testing, testing.
Testing, testing, testing.
Testing.
Testing, testing.
Testing. Okay, we're good.
Testing,
All right.
testing, testing.
I think he's good. All right, Sam, if you'll just give me a cue when we're live, and I'll go ahead and say, oh, we're live. Okay. All right, I'll go ahead and do it. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Mitocronal Library. We're happy to have everyone here today. We're pleased to have our presenter, Mr. Robert Davis, with us today. And for our viewers from home via YouTube Live, we welcome you as well. If you have questions for our presenter, please type them on the comments section as you're viewing YouTube Live. Thank you, Mr. Davis, for being with us today, and I'll turn the program over to you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. All right. First, a brief commercial. I run a genealogical collection at Wallace State College in Hanceville, Alabama, near Coleman. And you're always welcome when we're open to come by and research your family tree for free, and our staff will be happy to help you. Also, in your handouts, there is my email address, robert.davis@onewordwallacestate.edu. And we have a free newsletter where we put out announcements and we talk about genealogy and other good things. Okay. Like any good college professor, I tell my class at the first session where the name of the subject comes from. And genealogy comes from the Greek word genus, which, contrary to what your old biology teacher used to tell you, is not Greek for family. It's Greek for related to, which means something very different, something very different. But genealogy is in the same family with genetics and so many other related subjects. It is the world's most popular hobby, except for stamp collecting, and in the United States, the most popular pastime. And the popularity continues to grow. Unfortunately, because it is so popular on the internet, many people no longer go to great libraries like this one to do their research, and libraries are suffering as a consequence. But also people doing research are suffering because there's an awful lot of really good stuff in books and in files that you do not find on the internet. So, the internet is a wonderful thing, and we will talk about it another time in great detail. But let it just be one tool in your toolbox. Let libraries and memberships in genealogical societies and genealogical periodicals and visiting your family, let that be other tools in your toolbox, and then build your genealogy from all of this. I use all of these things to put together family histories. And people ask me why am I so successful at what I do? And I say, maybe it's because I was doing this long before the internet was ever invented. And so I know the old school and the new school, and both schools are a huge help. All right, now talking about the internet, however, there are many free sites on the internet that can give you a world of good and useful advice. And when somebody throws a particular problem at me, sometimes the first thing I do is I reach for the keyboard and I just simply Google the subject. I had a professor from your own Talladega College call me the other day, and he had some tremendous problems. And I was on the phone with him, and while he was going on and on, I banged away on the keyboard. And I said, of course you're familiar with so-and-so's book. No, there's a book on this? Oh, why, yes, as a matter. And he's thinking I'm pulling this stuff off the top of my head. But no, I'm Googling it. and it's coming up. But there's lots of free help sites. And the very, very best for researching your family tree is called Familysearch. And it's put out by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Don't worry about prophesizing or whatever. The many decades that I've worked with the Mormon Church, they have never tried to convert me to anything but genealogy. And at that, they were way too late. But anyway, Familysearch, a tremendous site, and we'll talk about it again later. It is a good idea to be a member of genealogical societies. You might meet people in those societies who can share information with you. Most societies have some kind of a publication, and you may find wonderful things on your family that someone has published in the past, as that goes. And then also genealogical societies, back before COVID, they had speakers like me who would come and talk on various subjects, and you learn about whole new worlds of information that might get you past a roadblock in your family tree, or might confirm or deny some family story that you've been pursuing for a very long time. However, I must warn you out of respect and perfect honesty that genealogy can be a bad thing. Researching your family tree can be a bad thing if you become absolutely obsessed with it. No, I'm just kidding. There's nothing wrong with being obsessed with researching your family tree or doing genealogy. Nobody ever had a problem with that in that regard. Nobody starts a church group to sit around in a circle and try not to do genealogy. Although it might be that next cute insurance commercial where that guy is trying to help people keep from becoming their parents or something. Maybe something like that will happen. Maybe that will be available. Now, there's some common terms that we use in genealogy, and I don't cover all of them here, but some that you might not be familiar with. You can be a direct descendant, or you can be a collateral descendant. There are no living direct descendants of George Washington. He had no biological children. A direct descendant is someone who is a direct biological descendant. A collateral descendant is someone who descends from the brother or sister of someone. Now, George Washington has millions, probably, of collateral descendants, that is, people who descend from his brothers and sisters, but he has no direct descendants. Abraham Lincoln does not even have collateral descendants, never mind direct descendants. An allied family is a family that married into your main line. Now, let's say you're researching the Haygood family or something like that, and the Haygood family is your primary focus. All right, along the way in tracing your Haygood line, every family that your Haygood ancestors married into is an allied family, Now, of course, you're saying, but wait a minute, would not those families also be my ancestors too? And you're absolutely right. Yes, they would be. But if you just want to concentrate on one of these other families that comes in by marriage, well, then the Haygoods become the allied family, if you follow my drift there. And of course, many of us have known places where, for example, in Blount County, Alabama, they have every year the 5 families reunion. Blount County was founded by 5 families. And these families have also intermarried with each other, that they are essentially one family, whatever their last names may be. And I guess the term allied families has nothing to do with them, but the Murphys, the Bynums, the Aldridges, etc. Of that. But anyway, the families, as I say, are so intermarried, they just have one family reunion for all 5 families. And as that goes. Okay, as that is. Now, there are 2 types of families that you will find in your research. One is a family like the Davises, like my family, where some Davises are like the 9th largest, most common last name in America. And there are millions and millions of us, and many of us are no kin to each other at all. Most of us are no kin to each other. For example, everybody asks me, how am I kin to Jefferson Davis? I am no kin at all. I'm not even kin to him through his mother, who was a cook, and I have 2 cook lines. But I'm just not. His Davises were Welsh, and my Davises were French, sort of. It's a long-winded story that we'll perhaps save for another time to explain how I come to be a Davis. But that's also a problem with that as well. Anyway, there are those families where they're just endless families and of the same name who are not related to each other. And then there are those people who are blessed with the last name like Allred and Hammondtree and Adair and Haygood and Wellborn, where there's only one family of them in the entire planet. And if you encounter an Adair in your family tree, or a Wellborn, or an Allred, or a Hammondtree, or a Haygood, or Ragsdale, that's another family. There's only one family of them. It is just a question of how do you figure out how to connect into mountains of genealogy that have been done on each of these families. There's only one family of them, and if you encounter someone with that last name, they must be a member of that greater family, And of course, you know, there'll always be someone out there with a computer who has put every known member of that family on their computer. And they're just sitting there at night waiting for you to email them with your family tree so they can hook you up as well and send you a copy of the greater family tree. All right, now, where do you get started in researching your family tree? All right, one of the first of many sayings in genealogy that I will share with you over the next few months. Among the secrets that I will share with you is the best place to go looking for your family tree is in your family. Now, there's 2 things you're going to be told starting right out, that neither of which are true. First of this is nobody knows anything about the family. There's always somebody who knows about your family. There's always somebody out there who knows something about your family. And the second thing is that there is someone in the family who probably knows everything because that person is as old as dirt. But this person is not going to talk to you because this person hasn't talked to our side of the family since 1968. Now, for the rest of this course, I'm going to refer to this person as Aunt Maud. But Aunt Maud could be male. Aunt Maud could even be younger than you are. Some branches of the family will preserve family history better than other branches. And in some cases, you find someone who's even a lot younger than you, who's been researching that family for a lot longer than you have. And they even got to people who since passed away who are a gold mine of information. In the 1970s, I went and interviewed all the oldest members of my family, and they're all gone now. And the information they gave me was pure gold. I mean, yes, there was mistakes and exaggerations. There were some things they did not want to tell me as that goes, but nonetheless, it's very valuable. And you may find some relative who interviewed someone way back when, whose memories you now have. So first, search within your own family. Now, as I say, we will refer to this hypothetical person as Aunt Maud, but that's fine. All right, first off, you pressure on anybody. Is there anybody in the family who has done research on the family? You can Google that. You can put queries out on the internet. You can go to genealogical meetings and ask about this. And if you'd be surprised how successful, I would say perhaps in the high 90s or something, you will find somebody who's been researching the family or knows the family stories, somebody who is worth interviewing. All right, when you set out to interview somebody, now we have a handout. It's one of those that was given to you. It's how to interview a relative, And so don't worry about taking extensive notes on what I'm about to say. This is also repeated in the handout with some additional information. All right, first off, you need to query the people within the family who know information. Now, if at all humanly possible, you want to interview your Aunt Maud in person, eye to eye. I guess you can do it on Zoom. I've not done an interview on Zoom with Aunt Maud yet. You can do it by Zoom or whatever. Maybe Aunt Maud is really good with email or something like that. You do not want to conduct an interview by telephone because your relative will presume this is costing you a fortune, and so they'll want to keep it as short as possible. I prefer interviewing people in person. Now, you need to find out where, of course, where Aunt Maud lives, and with that, you may end up having to Google Aunt Maud to find out where she's living and to get her phone number. And sometimes all you have is a phone number. When you are setting out to contact someone like that, always keep in mind bedtime and always keep in mind mealtime. People have supper at different times of day. People go to bed at different times. And, there's really no way of knowing. Best thing I could recommend is I would try about 6 o'clock, whatever time zone Aunt Maud lives in. Now, if you're from California, of course, you have no idea what I'm talking about. But let me awaken you on this point. The rest of the world is not on California time, okay? It is not. So do watch out for the time zones. So you call Aunt Maud's phone number. You ask to speak to her, and they will say things like, "Well, you just missed her," or "Let me go get her for you," or "She's just laid down to take a nap," or "She died last week," or whatever. Now, unless she died, we'll be talking about seances more a little later. But unless she died, ask when would be an appropriate time to talk with her on the phone. Explain on the phone who you are and what you're trying to do, and explain how you're related to her. Now, if you get an answering machine, like Miss Manners teaches us, don't worry about being rude to an answering machine. You can't be rude to a machine. You can only be rude to people. But anyway, if you get an answering machine, feel free to leave a message and a phone number. And again, in the message, explain who you are and what you're trying to do. These days, we all get so many emails and phone calls and whatever. When I leave a message for someone these days, I feel like starting by saying, I'm not trying to sell you auto repair insurance or something like that, because, well, we all know what it is like. All right, so when you get Aunt Maud on the phone, you explain to her what you're trying to do and that you would like to interview her about the family history because you've heard that she knows so much about it. Okay, now, this is one of the tricky parts here. Aunt Maud will say, okay, fine, and she'll give you a time and a place, and if it works for you, that's fine. However, watch out for anyone who ever tells you, well, we never go anywhere. We just sitting around here waiting to die. You can come by anytime. This is sort of a bad joke by people who are never home. If that's the case, tie her down to a date and a time. But always understand that your relative is doing a favor to you, not the other way around. Although, to a certain extent, it becomes the other way too. But anyways, set a time and a date, and then write her a letter confirming the date and time, and maybe including a family chart to show how you and her are related to each other. Okay, when you go, let me look around the room here and let me see if there's anybody here who should not be interviewing their Aunt Maud after this class is over. Absolutely not. The only person I see in this room that's poorly dressed for interviewing Aunt Maud is me. I look like I'm trying to sell her some kind of auto repair insurance. Never dress better than your relatives, but at the same time, don't underdress either. Don't underdress either. Because you're there to collect family stories, not to start family stories about how you are. And by the way, you might want to leave the Rolls Royce or the Jaguar at home and drive something a bit more pedestrian, if you would, because you're not there to offend your relatives. Okay, when is the best time for an interview like this? That is a very good question. That is a very good question. I like interviews on Saturday afternoons. I like that on Saturday mornings and Sunday afternoons. And of course, sometimes that depends on religion. People do not like to get together on Sunday mornings because they have church, or at least they want you to think they have church. Saturdays are always good times, as this is. But whatever time is convenient with Aunt Maud, whatever time is convenient with Aunt Maud. Never take anybody with you on such a trip who does not want to be involved in the family history research. No matter what they tell you setting out, once you get there, every 15 minutes, they'll be asking, can we leave now? Also, be sure to eat an hour before you visit Aunt Maud. Be sure to eat an hour before you visit Aunt Maud. Never presume that your relatives are going to feed you. So you don't want to be hungry during the interview. At the same time, you don't want to have just stuffed yourself and you walk into a huge spread that they laid out just in honor of your visit. Always bring a recording device with you. An excellent recording device is your cell phone, but make sure that you know how to use the recorder on your cell phone. A really cool thing about your cell phone, and always bring a electric charger with your cell phone, is that it also comes with a motion picture camera, so you can film you with Aunt Maud. You can record video as well as audio of you and your Aunt Maud. Now, all that's well and good. I still prefer to use an old-fashioned well, this isn't so old-fashioned, a recorder. And the new recorders they've got are just absolutely wonderful. And I'm not here to advertise for any brand. They're all wonderful. This one, for example, will record 250 hours of interviews. But make sure you know how it works before you get there, and make sure you've got some fresh batteries. But I particularly like this kind because I can just push this little thing up and I can stick this sucker right in my computer through the USB port and copy the audio file right into my computer. And there are actually companies out there, you can send them your audio file, and for a very reasonable fee, they will actually transcribe the entire interview for you, which is a good thing to think about as that goes. All right, you're going to interview your Aunt Maud for the family history. Okay, now how do you do this? Well, it's a lot simpler than you think it is. Oh, and by the way, I like this kind of a recording device, and I like a cell phone because they're so small. Aunt Maud can forget that she's recording, and she might actually tell you why she's not spoken to your side of the family since 1968, and you get it recorded. But that's the most wonderful kind of interview, is when somebody is telling you the family secrets, because nobody's Aunt Maud wants you to think badly of the family. And so they're not going to tell you about insanity or alcoholism or violence or prison sentences or things like that, or time in the insane asylum. But maybe if you're there with Aunt Maud long enough, she will start sharing some of this information with you. Now, of course, it sometimes depends on the family. I know of one family where they are so hopeless in that regard that they were telling me that the FBI caters their family reunion. And he said they give out door prizes. They flash up pictures of their relatives, and if you can tell them where the relative is hiding now and under what name, you get door prizes. And that last year they caught one of them in the crowd saying, "That's me," and the FBI took them away. Okay, they would go ahead and fingerprint and DNA all the children because they'll need it eventually. Okay, as this goes. All right, anyway, the first thing you do is you identify yourself on the recording, and you identify the time and place and who you are interviewing. And then you ask Aunt Maud to give you her full name and her date of birth. Now, what if there are members of her family who want to sit in on this interview? Should you allow them to do that? The answer is absolutely yes. Because they've lived with Aunt Maud all these years, and in case she forgets something, they will gently remind her. Don't forget the story about the flying machine. And don't forget the story that great-grandpa told about the First World War or whatever. But they've heard these stories, and maybe this day Aunt Maud hasn't thought to mention them, but they will. But if there are other people who are going to be part of the conversation, have them give their name and date of birth on the tape too, so you can recognize on the recording, so that you can recognize when you're transcribing it who you're listening to, who else was there talking about that. So that is a good idea. All right, I would start with Aunt Maud. Ask her for would she like to say about herself? What is her personal history? Then get her to talk about her parents, then her brothers and sisters, and just let it go in an ever-widening circle, if you would, of the family, in an ever-widening circle. Believe it or not, as my old sergeant used to say, inside each of us is the great American novel. Problem is, none of us are Ernest Hemingway. And there's no story that can't be made into a story of triumph. That cannot be made into a story of triumph. Okay, but nonetheless, all of us have a story that we want to tell. We want to tell about ourselves, and we want to tell about our family. And all we're looking for is somebody like you to record it. Someone like you to record it. Okay, so most of the time I find all I have to do is just let people go, and they just take off like a rocket. And I just have to sit there and listen. Now, always bring with you a notepad and pen, just like the kind you have here. Or if you're more computer astute than I am, bring your laptop or something. And be sure to have typed up questions you want to be sure to ask Aunt Maud. Aunt Maud, is it true that 3 of our family members made the FBI's 10 most wanted? You know, that sort of thing. But you don't start out with those questions. You save those questions for the end. And as Aunt Maud is telling you the family stories, you write down questions that you want to ask her when she finishes. Good example of this, I interviewed my great Uncle Bird Davis. And Uncle Bird was going on and on about how wonderful Bub was. Bub was the finest man I ever knew. Even after nobody else cared about us up here, he'd still come by now and then just to check on us. And when I was a little kid, he let me follow him. And not everybody lets a little kid follow him. And we were just like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. We couldn't have been any closer. And he respected me and he loved me, and I love Bub, and I still love Bub today. And of course, when he reached the end of the interview, I asked him, "Who is Bub?" And he looked at me funny. He said, "Bub is your grandfather Davis." And in all the years I knew Pawpaw, and I loved my Pawpaw, I'd never heard him called Bub before, which probably helped our relationship. But anyway, like I said, write down questions to go on, to carry on about. All right. Now, should you stop the interview to ask for questions or clarity or something like that? Avoid that at all cost. Try not to. Now, there can be some exception. Maybe Aunt Maud has gone off on a rant about something. Maybe Aunt Maud's gone on about a rant about something, and maybe you'd like for her to get back to the subject. My great Aunt Mary Gaddis, I interviewed her, and she came from a family of mountain Republicans, and she could not stand Jimmy Carter. And she starts going on about President Jimmy Carter and how much she could not stand him. Now, I would not have disagreed with her on that, but I wasn't here to hear, somebody agree with me about President Carter. But she was going on and on. And just when I was going to try to steer her back to what I wanted, she turned to me and she said, "And that Hamilton Jordan guy who always hangs out with him. It was a Captain Benjamin Jordan, who hanged my great-great-grandfather during the Civil War for preaching that secession was against the will of God." And I nearly hit the floor hearing that. Now, if I'd stopped her or taken her off of her train of thought, I might not have gotten that story. And she went on to that story, and it's been published since then. On the other hand, I should also mention Aunt Mary Gaddis, great Aunt Mary Gaddis. Her father, who was my great-grandfather, her father, who was my great-grandfather, beg your pardon, my great-great-grandfather, was a member of a group of moonshining vigilantes who burned down people's houses, and he spent time in federal prison for moonshining. I learned this from court records years after Aunt Mary had died. She never breathed a word of it to me, which is a big disappointment on my part, because I would have loved, I know she knew things about the story that I would have loved to have heard, but she didn't want me to think badly of my great-grandfather. So anyway, as this goes. Now, you may encounter some Aunt Mary may say, your Aunt Maud may say to you, well, there's something I want to tell you, but I don't want it recorded. And what do you do about that? You turn off the recorder. But you be sure the moment she's willing to have the recorder running again, you turn your cell phone back on, you turn your tape recorder back on, whatever. Now, a trick I do is when this is all over and I'm driving away, I take out my trusty recorder, and I record into it everything Aunt Maud told me when the recorder was off. And of course, that could never be used in a court of law or anything like that, but I'm not into a court of law. I'm into family history. Okay, now, so as it says, now, watch for okay, we've interviewed Aunt Maud. She's reached the end. You've hit her with the questions. You've asked her, and she's answered them the best she can. Look for telltale signs that your Aunt Maud really would like for the interview to come to an end. Things like they pull your car around to the front of the house. Aunt Maud gets into her nightgown. They start turning out the lights. They escort you to the porch. Little telltale signs like that. Remember, the point is to interview Aunt Maud, not to kill Aunt Maud. Now, there's a couple of questions here that you must always ask the people you're interviewing. And never forget these first questions. The first one you have to be very delicate about, because you don't want to insult the person you're interviewing. Aunt Maud, this is wonderful stuff. This is just tremendous. I can't thank you enough. How on earth did you come to know so much about the family? Now, you have to word it that way, because otherwise you might imply to Aunt Maud that you think she's a liar. And you don't want to do that. And you don't want an argument of the facts. Even if she's told you the most incredible stuff and you don't believe a word of it, record it anyway and don't challenge it. Do not challenge it. You'd be surprised the incredible stories that I've interviewed over time, gotten from interviews over time, that turned out to be exactly true, or even stranger than the family story remembered. Second question, ask Aunt Maud if she has any records, photographs, Bible records, things of the family heirlooms, whatever. And you would be surprised what people have in their attics. You know, I'm sorry, son, but everything the family had was been lost in movement from one place to another, or a fire. All we've got is like 570 square feet of family records in that building out back marked archives. You know, this is why you bring by the way, you can copy this stuff using the camera on your cell phone, and the cameras on cell phones get better all the time. But I still really can't take a decent picture with my cell phone. So I always bring a digital camera with me, and take the pictures that way. I'm just much more comfortable with a digital camera. The same situation may be true of you. Always plan on coming back and interviewing Aunt Maud again. All right, now, what you do with always come back, because I assure you that you're no sooner out of sight than Aunt Maud is already thinking of things she wanted to tell you and didn't. And you are hardly out of sight when you know, here's some questions I should have asked her and I didn't. And so plan on a second trip. Plan on a second trip. All right. What do you do now? What do you do now? Well, first you type up the information that Aunt Maud has given you. And many people these days would immediately go to a genealogy program like the free program Familysearch, or maybe they would come down to a wonderful library like this that has Ancestry on it, and you would search your family on Ancestry based on the information that Aunt Maud gave. Now, there are two types of records that are helpful to us in our family research. And the first of these is called vital records. And there's a lot of myths and misunderstandings about vital records. Vital records are marriages, deaths, births, and divorces. Marriages, births, deaths, and divorces. And every state handles these records differently. And so you need to understand something of the records for the state in question, Seldom are these records perfect for everyone. I know of people who died in the 1960s and I can't find a death certificate for them. Why, I don't know. I know of people who married in relatively recent times. I can't find a marriage record for them, but there should have been one. Now, sometimes I will struggle to find something like that for years, and then I will find it. I struggled for years to find my grandfather's Social Security record. And then one day I'm playing around on the free site Familysearch, and I found it. They had it in the Social Security Death Index, whereas none of the other sites or places I had checked had it, but there it was for me. So do understand that there's going to be gaps in the records, and sometimes finding this stuff is going to be a lot harder than you can imagine. For example, last week I was looking for a death certificate. Now, why are death certificates so valuable? Because they ask you on a death certificate, who was the deceased parents, including the mother's maiden name, as well, of course, as when was the deceased born, when did the deceased die, what did the deceased die from, and of course there'll be a name there called the informant, and often the informant is a member of the family, and you know that that member of the family was living at that time and in that place. However, even death certificates are not infallible. Alabama was always, as far as records go, way ahead of everyone else. In Alabama, county probate courts were keeping birth and death records as early as 1884. The state was keeping these records as early as 1907. Now, that doesn't mean all these records survive or all these records were filed, but last week I was trying to find a death certificate in Chicago, in Illinois, and I could not even find the website for the Illinois Vital Records Office. And that's when I found out in Illinois, every county has its own Vital Records Office, and you have to work with them. So I contacted the Chicago Cook County Vital Records Office, and yes, we do have her death certificate, the lady's death certificate. Thank you. I sent them some money. They sent me the death certificate. And a death certificate from beginning to end, the informant wrote unknown. All this trouble and effort, and I don't know. However, it also gave me her Social Security number. And what that told me is that she registered for Social Security. So now I have contacted Social Security to get her Social Security application. And when I get that Social Security application, it will give me the names of her parents and this other information. Now, Social Security begins in 1938, and that there were a lot of people who, until recently, were not allowed Social Security. Medical personnel, farm labor, things like that. So you can't always count on it. But you can check on Familysearch and on Ancestry and on many of these sites. You can check the Social Security Death Index and see if you can find the person you're looking for. Okay, today we ask so much information from everybody. Nobody's lives as vital records is a secret anymore. I mean, really, why anybody thinks we have any privacy anymore is completely beyond me. Okay, some other sites in this kind of searching that you should be aware of. Find a Grave is a free site on the internet. Find a Grave. And volunteers have compiled so many tombstone records on this site that it's absolutely staggering. It's absolutely staggering. And if you go looking for someone on Find a Grave, there is a fighting good chance you're going to find their tombstone. Do be careful, though, about tombstone records, as often they are off by a few years. They're off by a few years. My great-great-great-grandfather, Sam Hammondtree, he served 3 years in Robert E. Lee's Army. He died in his 90s. He was a legend because he's one of the last Confederate soldiers, all this good stuff. I copied his date of death because for whatever reason, he does not have a death certificate. I copied the date of death off the tombstone, and I could find nothing about him in the newspapers. Well, I go to his Confederate pension, and I discovered he died 3 years later than his tombstone shows. Tombstones are notoriously bad on dates, so watch out for that with your tombstones. Another great site is Billion Graves. Billion Graves is another great site for finding tombstones. Okay, very quickly to mention about tombstones and such. Be very careful about tombstones. Do not put anything on a tombstone. Do not wash off the tombstone. Do not use soap or anything on a tombstone. Otherwise, the Alabama's excellent tombstone research group will come after you with a sickle. Tombstones should be left alone. Instead, do the best job you can photographing the inscription. Never trust a written transcription of a tombstone. And if you found out about the tombstone from a book of the county's published tombstone records, don't rely on that book. Go and see the tombstone for yourself. Often a lot of information is left out, and it's just the names and the dates and something like that. Also, the book may tell you he was the son of so-and-so and such and such, and you mistakenly think that is on the tombstone, and it's not. That's just something the person who compiled the book put down to try to help you out. So there's nothing wrong with by all means, go and see the tombstone and photograph the inscription. Okay, now the most important records for American family history research are the federal census, the Census of the United States. We have had a federal census from 1790 right up to 2020, Now, you can write to the federal government and you can get a copy of any federal census record that has you on it. You have to provide them with some information like the street address and the town or whatever sometimes. But any census record that you appear on, they will make you a copy of it. And this is because some people need these records for personal identification. For example, to get your Social Security benefits or something. Sometimes people need these records for that. All right. Anyway, the federal census records are important because they attempt to count everybody. Rich man, poor man, beggar man, thief, everyone, the attempt is made. And the Census Bureau has never succeeded because it's just completely succeeded because it's just too impossible a task. And there are all sorts of problems, particularly in the old days. Now, some of the first federal census records from 1790 to 1830 were lost. When the censuses were compiled, they were sent to the district federal court. And then the district federal court sent the statistics to Washington. And then the court either saved the census records or threw them out. And in too many states like Alabama, Tennessee, and Georgia, they threw out the early census records. But census records are generally very good from 1830, very complete from 1830 on. Now, census records are important because they are the second type of records, a people finder. Sometimes vital records are wonderful. They help you fill out your family tree. But to find someone, which is usually the bigger question, you depend on things like the federal census record to tell you where someone was at a given time. At a given time. And yes, census records are a nightmare when you're looking for John Smith. But you'd be surprised how many times I've had difficulty finding people with even unusual last names or unusual first names who should have been in the census. Census takers accidentally miss people. And the classic case of this is, back in the old days, it took like 3 months to compile the census. And so the census taker comes around and your family has left before the census taker shows up. And then wherever your family moved to, the census taker has already been through the neighborhood, so your family is literally missed coming and going. However, I've also found families recorded twice, once in the county they were leaving and once in the county they were going to, as this goes. From 1790 through 1840, you get the head of the household and statistics in the household. Now, you presume that the oldest statistic in these families is the head of the household, whose name will appear in the census. That's not necessarily the truth. That might be the head of the household's father-in-law or uncle or aunt or whatever, who just needed a place to stay. And you can't presume that all the children there belong to the head of the household. Some of them could be servants, some of them could be adopted, some of them could just be living there at the time. So be very careful about the statistics and what you presume from them. Now, starting in 1850, everybody in the household is named. Everybody in the household is named. And they give you where they were born and their age and their marital status and all sorts of other good and useful information. And sometimes it's exceptionally good. For example, sometimes the census taker put down county and state of birth, not just state of birth, and that can be extremely helpful. It is a good idea in census records, and by the way, we have a handout on the census records that was passed out to you as well. It is a good thing with census records to look up all the members of the family, because maybe somebody lived in one of these counties with more information that gave more information or such. Now, census records are full of mistakes. First things first, understand that even when I was a census taker in 1980, we were told not to go door to door, but to find the village gossip and write down all the information they could tell us. And you'd be surprised how much screwed up information your neighbors have about you that they would gladly tell a census taker to have it recorded down. Now, in 1940, some clever person at the Census Bureau decided that if you were interviewing somebody who was in the census, you had to mark beside their name that they were the person you interviewed. And you'd be surprised how many people get the information screwed up on their own household and their own family members. So, of course, this leaves a lot of problems. Most common problem is age. Typically, a census taker can be off by 5 years on a person's age. I've seen it as much as 20 years. And then it can be confusing. For example, you have some relative who you don't know this, but your relative was married 3 times, and each one was an Elizabeth. Elizabeths are kind of like potato chips. You know, once you start, it has to be an Elizabeth. But anyway, and the thing of it is, if you looked at the census, you might not understand that it's 3 different women showing up in the census. Also, women were frequently given pet names. That's an ugly word for it, but pet names. That is, they had second or third, they had what we would call nicknames, or they had 2 or 3 additional names. 2 or 3 additional names to this. So somebody who shows up as Ann in one census may show up as Martha in another. Okay, trivia question here. All right, what is a pet name or nickname, if you would, for Mary? I knew y'all were smarter than the average group I spoke to. Yes, you're absolutely correct. And what is a pet name for Martha? Patsy. They almost in the old days never used Patricia. What is a pet name for Anne? Nancy. And a similar situation can also exist for men as well. There is a really dramatic scene in the movie Gettysburg where everybody thinks General Hood is dying. And General Hood is pleading with General Longstreet that his boys were just so brave and they fought, but nobody could take that little hill. And there's not a dry eye in the house. But I would have just loved it if the dying General Hood props himself on one arm, up on one elbow, and he looks at the General Longstreet and he says, "Before I die, General Longstreet, there's something I must know. If your name is James, why do we call you Pete? And my name is John, so why is everybody calling me Sam?" If I thought I was dying, that would be something I'd want to know. Is it some kind of an inside joke? So you do have to be careful about names. And of course, no census taker in the history of the United States Census ever asked anybody how a name was spelled. And watch out particularly for names that begin with C or K, because sometimes the census taker will spell the family C with a C and sometimes with a K. All right, you find somebody in the federal census who might possibly be interesting in your family. And this genealogical rule applies to any information that you are seeking, If you find something valuable in a book, you find something valuable in a census record, you find something valuable in a military record, you whip out your change purse and you make a copy, or you whip out your camera and you photograph it. And when you do, you be sure to photograph the title page. Human beings have many shortcomings, one of which is no human being can accurately write down the name of a book and its title and the library and the page where they found something. Somehow or another, we always screw it up, but only when it's important to us. Only when it's important. I have people who come to my library. Can you tell me where I copied this page from? I was here about 30 years ago. I think I copied it in your library. I think the book was yellow. And I'm looking at him. Do I look like the great Kreskin? I don't bend spoons. I don't read minds, and I don't travel through time. I'm not Doctor Who. Although you'd be surprised, I've seen so many books over time. Sometimes I can tell by looking at a page what book it did come from. But anyway, always, and the same thing is particularly true with the census. You find something that looks interesting in the census, but you do not make a copy of it, and I guarantee you that next week the continuation of Western civilization or a cure for COVID is going to depend on you finding that page in the census again, and you're not going to be able to find it. Now you say, there you are going on and on again about computers. Well, we live in the 21st century. We live in computers. If I can find it on the computer one time, I can find it again. Oh, you are so sweetly naive. That's why everybody loves you. Every day I find something valuable on a computer and then I can't find it again. And I'm talking about these major genealogy computer sites. Type in a name, I find them in the federal census, all the rest of, or I did last week, but I can't find them now. And unless I go back to the file and pull the copies that I made. But even I make that omission from time to time, but don't let yourself do that. Anytime anything looks the least bit interesting, make a copy and make a copy of the title page and write down where you were when you saw it. I have a good friend who does this, and he's been doing genealogy even longer than I have. And he actually has these hideous old green steno pads. When I'm teaching my young students about genealogy, they immediately want to know what a steno pad is. And I said, well, go to the Natural History Museum and get past the dinosaurs, and you'll still see a steno pad on. And steno pads are a terrible thing for recording anything on. They're green, and they don't have holes punched in them where you can stick them in a notebook or something. But anyway, he always puts down where he is at, the date he is there, and then he writes down the sources that he checked, which is a very good thing to do. And he even goes another step on this. When he gets home or he gets to his motel, he types it all into his computer. And then he scans the page into the computer too. This is sort of Adrian Monk obsessive genealogy. But let me say in my defense, however, that for all that he does in this, which is wonderful, he still can't find anything. In fact, it was funny, but last week he actually contacted me about a list. He said, you published this list 30 years ago, and in the list you said that you borrowed it from me, and I want to know, did you give it back to me? And I said, I don't have a clue what you're talking about. And I looked in my files, I couldn't find it in my files, and told him that, and he said, well, I can't find it in my files either. And I said, have you checked the garage? He emailed back and said, give me a minute. And that's where the list was. But again, we are all creatures of habit, and there's some good habits to get into. One habit I get into is I always return anything that I borrow. That way I don't have to worry about it on that. Never a lender or a borrower be in genealogy. When you're interviewing your Aunt Maud, and your Aunt Maud is showing you the family photos, and there's pictures that you just die for, that's when you whip out your camera and you take pictures of them. Or you whip out your cell phone, if you're really good at that, and take pictures of them. But here's a question for you. What if Aunt Maud says, these people are not our family, and you're interested, and I would just love for your family to have these pictures since it's your folks. Would you like to have these pictures? What do you do, or this Bible record, or this bowl that your great-great-grandmother gave me? Would you like to have it? Your answer is yes, yes, yes. And you take it away from the poor old lady so fast that you singe your fingers. Never make anybody ask you twice if you would like something with that. Because I can assure you that the next time you come by, Aunt Maud is dead, and nobody has a clue where the photos are or the bowl is or whatever. Okay. Oh, and by the way, if you do take pictures of all of this, it's always a nice idea to send Aunt Maud a copy of them. And that will only put you deeper into her good graces. Okay. All right, now let's talk a little bit more about going back to genealogy. Computers and genealogy. Let's go back to that for a moment. Okay, there are many free sites out there. Many free sites that you can work with. The most famous of these are Find a Grave and Familysearch. Free sites with lots of good information. But all of these sites have their tricks and secrets to them. And I'll expose some of these for you later. Familysearch.org, one of the secrets about it, they have scanned millions and millions of pages of original county records. Millions and millions of pages of these. And they're free on their website. Now, how do you access this? You click the search command, and then there'll be a list of search options. You click on collections. And when you click on collections, then it will ask you where, and you'll put down the geographic location, and then all the stuff that they've got, the county records, Bible records, whatever they have scanned from that location. For example, Sylacauga, Alabama. all that they have scanned there will show up on your screen, and you get to pick and choose what you need to look at. Okay, that's one of its great secrets. Also, when you just do a basic search of the records, that's a good thing to do, and you get all this wonderful, good information. Oh, again, presume, though, that you may never not see the same information again when you ask for it, but you find all this good information on the records. Also, click on family trees. This is where people, most of them are not Mormons. This is where people have sent the Mormons their family charts, and this is rich in all sorts of good information. Now, sometimes people are wrong, and sometimes you'll get 3 or 4 different versions of the same family tree, but the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints leaves it up to you to decide which information is credible and which information is not. But I find the best information there that somebody else has already done for me that at least steers me in the right direction. Okay, as this is. There are other sites. RootsWeb is a free site. And GenForum is a free site. You click on the GenForum, and most counties in this country have GenForum sites, and there they share information. You can leave queries and you can leave queries asking for information. There are people there. I have a complete library of everything that was ever published on this county. If you will tell me who you're looking for, I will check the indexes of the book for you and scan the pages for you. All sorts of wonderful things. The people at GenForum are just super wonderful. So anyway, and again, that is a free site. And then, of course, there are many public sites that are also helpful. If you know what county your ancestors came from, or what used to be the county your ancestors came from, contact the public library by email. Most libraries have some kind of a heritage room. And some libraries have just absolutely spectacular stuff and absolutely spectacular services. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with emailing a librarian and asking them for advice. And it can save you a lot more time than stumbling around in the dark trying to figure out how they deal with death certificates in Oregon or some other place that you're not familiar with. And many counties have just spectacular, you just sometimes have no idea what a county has until you've contacted the librarians. I love librarians. Librarians literally know where the bodies are buried, particularly the library at Fort Payne, Alabama, which is in the city cemetery. Hi, I'm looking for my ancestor, Samuel Jones Crabtree. Okay, how can you help me find him? Certainly, follow me out onto the back porch. That's him over there. Well, that was quick. Okay, and many libraries and archives and such have a great deal of material that they have scanned and put on the internet for us to use for free. I've been working with this family that came out of Cartersville, Georgia, and for some reason they all end up in Chicago. And one of the nice things I've learned from this particular project, you can contact the Cook County Public Library, the Chicago Public Library, something like the 4th best library in the country. You can contact them and they will look up an Illinois obituary for you or funeral notice. And that's just wonderful. And how much do they charge for this service? Nothing. Nothing at all. And so, like I say, you find things out. In fact, if you decide to go on a road trip to visit the county where your family came from, hoping to find information and family members, do not start at the courthouse. Start at the public library. Start at the public library and ask the librarians. You come in there, hi, I've come to your county and I've come here to Kaufman, Texas. I'm looking for the information on my all-red ancestors who settled here. And then the librarian puts her hand over your mouth and goes, shh. Here is the name of my aunt who will give you everything that has ever been done on the Allred family. And there you go. Or Have you seen our 9-volume, The All Red Family of Kaufman County, Texas? On and on about this, but every county is different. Every state is different as well. Okay, now on that, in your handouts, you have a handout on genealogy books, and this can help you on some of this broader research. There is a book, Genealogical Research in the National Archives of the United States. It will explain to you census records and federal land records. It will explain to you federal Indian records. It will explain federal military records. And it's written for the average person, not for some highfalutin academic. But anyway, it's a handout in your handout on books. Now, if you're going for state archives, anybody who thinks the federal government has taken over everything has never worked with the state government, other than maybe their own. But we are still 51 independent states and entities in this country, and each of those 51 states and entities does things in their own warm and wonderfully wacky way. And what applies in Alabama does not apply in Georgia, does not apply in Tennessee, does not apply in Maine, does not apply in the Virgin Islands. There is a book called Ancestry's Red Book, and it's on your list, Ancestry's Red Book, which will tell you about the records for each state and territory and province of the United States and how they do things in that particular place and the addresses that you need to know. And again, there's no problem with going online to Google and see what is available for a particular for a particular state. Nothing wrong with contacting the state archives and asking them some basic questions about research. Nothing wrong, just as there's nothing wrong with contacting the local public library, which can also be a world of good information. Anyways, they say start with the librarians, and you may not have to go any further as this goes. However, if you must go to the library, if you must go to the courthouse, the library does not have what you need. You didn't find it on Familysearch. You think a trip to the courthouse is in order. Remember always the 5 P's: preparedness, professionalism, politeness, patience, and persistence. Preparedness, professionalism, politeness, patience, and persistence. Have all of your stuff together. Have it all written down. Never bring your only copy of anything with you. Always make copies and bring the copies with you. I know people who go to a computer genealogy program and they will print out multiple copies of their family tree and take those with them. And if they happen to go to a library or an archives that has family folders, they'll slip this information in. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. But anyway, have your information in writing. Nothing wrong with having an electronic copy that you can access at a library and archives. But I'm still old school on that. I like to have a paper copy with me. A paper copy I could easily mark on with a pencil information that I find. Professionalism, and that a professional does not stand there and scream at county officials. County officials are not impressed. They all know the sheriff. You don't. So keep everything on a high plane. Also be dressed appropriately so that you will be appropriately respected. Always be unfailingly polite, even if the people you're dealing with are not. Nothing hurts a barbarian more than being treated with politeness and respect. Have patience. Have patience. Keep in mind that in most courthouses, you would not be their only customer. You must wait your turn until they can get around to seeing you. Now, let me assure you, I have worked with some of the nicest people I've ever known in courthouses. I've also worked with some of the biggest horses' rear ends I've ever met. including a relative of mine back in the little county I come from. He, for many, many years, was the clerk of the court, and he wanted everybody to believe he was a one-legged veteran of World War II. Actually, he just got drunk and drove over a cliff one night, but the story Aunt Maud did not tell me. Anyway, he would tell people who came there to research their family that all the county records were destroyed in a fire in 1948. Yes, we had a courthouse fire in 1948, but all the records were in fireproof vaults in the basement. He would just tell people that to get rid of them. Now, again, this goes back, this leads us to the final P, persistence. Don't come in there hoping to find 3 generations between buses in half an hour or something. Come in to spend as long as you need to get the job done. And the longer you are there in the courthouse pulling the records and whatever, the more the courthouse employees are going to warm up to you, and the more they're going to be interested in what you're doing, and the more they're going to be more inclined to help you. So as they say, follow the 5 Ps. Now, getting back to the internet, genealogy on the internet, you have to forgive me, I'm a college professor. Digress is what I do best. Okay, there are also subscription sites that are very helpful. Ancestry is the most common, and it too has its secrets. For example, when you do a standard search on Ancestry, it does not search everything. You have to click on the thing, collections or new collections, and then you have to select collections. They give you a keyword search engine. Let's say you want to search everything on Alabama. You click in Alabama, and they will list all the collections they've scanned on Alabama, not all of which are covered with the general search engine. And you click on those specific record groups, and you can search within those records. And the same applies for everywhere else. They're not just picking on Alabama. They have collections from all over the world that are not in their general search command, but you have to find under collections. Okay, now, again, Ancestry also has family trees, and it's worthwhile to search their family trees separately to see if somebody's submitted a family tree on your ancestors. Sometimes they give you enough information, the family tree, that you can find the person who submitted it. I worked on this, I'm writing a biography of Colonel George Washington Lee of Atlanta. And until a few weeks ago, I believed he had no living descendants because I thought his daughter died young. Actually, she died in 1934 in Chicago. And I was from one of these family trees where somebody wrote in there, we believe his daughter married a Rollins, and they misspelled Rollins. But I had to check that out, and when I did, sure enough, she did, and I found all these kids and descendants and whatever. Okay, so I go searching for these people, and I find them. But they have no idea they descend from Colonel George Washington Lee. They know nothing about him or his past. He's beyond their roadblock. So what I have done is using Familysearch and Ancestry and even Google. I have gotten addresses for his living descendants. And this week I mailed them copies of their family tree and a copy of a documented sketch on George Washington Lee. And you know there's going to be some awfully excited people. Would you not be excited? Okay, now again, segueing out of this for a moment or into something on that. This is one of the most important things you need to do as a genealogist. There are 2 types of genealogists in this world. There are those who look for all of their relatives, and that's how it should be done. And then there's people like me, I'm only interested in my family tree, not my cousins and whatever. That's not how to do it. But when I finish a big project like Colonel Lee, I always go looking for the living descendants, and I do this for a bunch of reasons. One is they may have information, relics, photographs, whatever that can help me. And secondly, I sometimes find some additional information. Now, 4 out of every 5 times I go looking for a family like that, 4 out of 5 times, they have nothing. And out of that 5th time, they have something, but 1 out of every 5 of that 5th time, they're not going to share with me the information they have. But I'll take 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 10 any day of the week, if you would, in the chances of finding more information and new information. Now, point I'm trying to make about this. I track down the living descendants of the people I've been writing these historical articles about and books about and the rest of it. I contact them. They have no idea what I'm talking about. They don't have their family tree back much further than their grandparents. And I send them a file this thick on their ancestry. I'm still getting Christmas cards from some of these people, thanking me because I gave them their family history. And me, I would like to find lots of good stuff to use in my project, but if I'm not going to do that, making somebody's day like that is a wonderful consolation prize. Now that sort of segues us even further away from what I'm talking about, or maybe it brings us back full circle. We also need to use, aside from the subscription sites and the free sites, the internet also provides us with a way of finding the living. And it is amazing how much useful information can be found by Googling someone. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with hiring one of these cyber detective agencies like USA People Search or whatever to look for someone. As this goes, I did this years ago on a big project. This guy in Seattle, and all I knew was that he lived in Seattle, and I sent them $75, and they gave me a long list of people, and I contacted those people by mail. None of them knew what I was talking about, and so I contacted them. They said, "Well, we're so sorry about this. Do you have any additional information?" And I said, "Yeah, I've got his date of birth now." And they said, "Wonderful, wonderful. Well, give us that, and we'll do another search for free." And they did, and they sent me exactly the same list, except in one case, they had a phone number. And I called the guy at the phone number, and all these people turned out to be him. He was just living under all these aliases, and he thought I was a bill collector. Anyway, wonderful. He and I had a wonderful conversation. I told him what I was doing, and I asked him if he would like a copy of it, and he said, "Absolutely not." He said he came from a horrible family, and he was glad that he was the last living member of it. And when he's gone, the world will be a better place for it. I said, "Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but anyway, if you could ever think of something, please keep me in mind." He said, "I certainly will." And he said, "By the way, that person you're looking for, I sold his letters through Sotheby's 2 years ago for $250. If you'd called me back then, I would have given them to you." Anyway, a week later, I get a FedEx from him, and there's a note that said, "I forgot that I copied the letters before I sold them. Here are the copies." And then a week after that, he sends me another FedEx. "All those people you were talking about, I looked in Grandma's trunk, and here are photographs of all of them. And you can keep the photographs." And one of them, by the way, was the founder, the creator, inventor of American football. And the photographs today, by the way, are at the University of Georgia. Okay, so this goes. And there are other subscription sites. New England Historic Genealogical Society, also called American Ancestors. Wonderful website full of all sorts of good things that you can search if you become a member, But that's doubly so if you think you might have a colonial dame's ancestor or a Pilgrim or Mayflower or early New England ancestor. They are just a super organization, and whatever you pay for in the membership, you'll get back many times over in what they provide for you, Okay. All right. Now, of course, also do not forget to visit our special genealogical libraries. The greatest collection for Southern research that has ever been assembled or ever will be assembled is Southern history at the Birmingham Public Library. And like all good libraries, it has its secrets. It has indexed DAR typescripts of records and WPA typescripts of records on their shelves where you'll find them nowhere else. Underneath the Southern History Collection, during the regular week, they have the Birmingham Archives, which also has fabulous treasures in it as well. If you have family from East Tennessee or Southwest Virginia or Western North Carolina, there is a library in Knoxville, Tennessee called the McClung Collection. It's not a collection, it's a library. And it's absolutely spectacular for that region, But it does have one shortcoming though. No matter what you find in their collection, they will not allow you to make copies of it. No, they insist on making all the copies for you. That way you don't screw it up. That's the kind of people. Oh, and by the way, they are open 7 days a week. And there are other great libraries like this as well. Day's drive from here is the Allen County Fort Wayne Library, which is the second largest genealogical library in the world. Only the Great Genealogical Library in Salt Lake is bigger than they are. It's in Fort Wayne, Indiana, the Allen County Fort Wayne Public Library. It does, however, have a strong Midwestern flavor. And one of the nicest things they have is a giant bibliography of genealogical articles. It's called Persi, P-E-R-S-I, and you can check that online to see if there are articles that specifically deal with what you are researching, All right, now I am not the world's greatest authority on DNA research, but DNA research needs to be an important tool in your toolbox as well. First off, there are many DNA testing services now, many of them out there, the catering to genealogists, particularly because of all these commercials you've seen on TV where people hook up with their families and their ancestry and whatever thanks to DNA. Well, the best way to check for DNA, find the right outfit for you with DNA. The best way of finding that is to check on and this also applies to anything else, not just DNA research. Google what it is you are looking for, and find websites where there have been consumer agencies comparing one service with another. This applies whether you're buying computers, or you're buying a car, or you're looking for a DNA service, or whatever. Things like Angie's List and such that will compare for you and tell you the differences between them. Another good example of this, everybody needs to have a genealogy program for putting their family tree together. And if you go to consumer services, you will look for computer services for genealogical programs. If you use a standard PC, the most popular one is Legacy, which is a very good computer program for putting your family tree together. I personally use Roots Magic, which is like the third or fourth on the list. But anyway, they give you the pros and cons of each of these sites on that. And of course, they also rate those genealogy programs for Apple Macintosh computers as well. Well, anyway, you can also do this for DNA research services. I was one of the very first people to have their blood tested for DNA for purposes of genealogy. This was way back when. And the reason was the late Dr. Thomas Broderick. He was a geneticist as well as a genealogist. And he wanted to prove Indian ancestry in someone where the records did not survive. And I had a story that my grandmother was a direct female descendant of a full-blooded Cherokee Indian. And anyway, the blood test was done, And they not only did not find any Indian DNA in my father's blood, but in mine either. My father and I had the least interesting blood of anyone who's ever had it taken. We are pure white-bread Europeans. I mean, we had distant ancestors who came from I can't pronounce it, Azerbaijan. So yeah, we probably had something to do with inventing the apple, but that's about it. And I mean the fruit, not the computer. Okay, anyway, of the three times, now first you need to find a testing service. I use 23andMe. Oh, another good one is Family Tree DNA. And of course, everybody signs up for Ancestry because of the advertising, and they offer you some really good deals on the testing. All right, you can be tested for three things. First off, your purely female line. Your purely female line. This is called mitochondrial DNA. And this is the DNA that is passed through your one all-female line all the way back to Eve or Lucy, depending on whose book you're reading. And over time, this strain will have mutations, and these different mutations separate one person from another. Separate one person from another. Then for men, there's mitocronal DNA. And then, not mitocronal, Y chromosome DNA, I beg your pardon. Y chromosome DNA. And this goes through your purely male line all the way back to the first human male. And again, it has mutations that distinguish one person from another in a family tree. The third type is to determine your ethnicity. Determine your ethnicity through DNA, which can be done, your ethnicity. However, which you discover that you're 30% Native American, you're 10% African American, you're 60% European, and the more specific the test you buy, the more specific they can be with the answers. DNA is wonderful, and it can provide circumstantial evidence that can solve a lot of problems. But it has problems as well. There's an old joke that goes that there was this guy who founded a family association. And he was its president from its very beginning. And they had all these wonderful family reunions and get-togethers and the rest of it. And then one day, all the men in the family decided they were going to have they were going to have Y chromosome test run to determine once and for all which branches of the family each of them belonged to. And that worked out fine for every one of these men, except for the guy who founded the family association. He didn't match up with anybody. So he goes to see his mother, and his mother says, well, son, you were having so much fun with this genealogy stuff, I just didn't have the heart to tell you about me and the milkman. So, of course, that can happen. I mean, it's not just my generation that started that, but as that goes, so you have that problem. You have that problem in the family tree. Also, some people, there's been the issue that some people will not do their DNA, usually the people you most need it, because they're afraid that somebody in their family is going to end up in jail because the police are using DNA to track people down. They even have a TV show for that now called Bloodlines, which they're following. Also, when you're doing DNA, remember that anything the DNA tells you is circumstantial. It is never absolute proof. And no matter how high a percentage they give you, let's say you get a return that says that you and person A are 93% related. That still means there's a 7% chance you're not. And it's a false positive. So you have to be careful about it. The last couple of years, twice I've been contacted by people who assured me they were 73% related to me, which means they should be no more than my second cousin. Funny thing is, I can't find where I'm related to any of these people, where any of my ancestors even lived in the same region that they did. And even stranger, they don't match each other either. So, like I said, understand it is a percentage and it may not be correct. So you do your DNA test, and you're finally going to prove that your ancestor was a Cherokee princess. And you're just so excited over it, you just can't wait. Well, that's sort of what happened to my father and me in that first DNA test. The nice young lady from Berkeley called and said, I've got some bad news for your father and some worse news for you. And I figured maybe she found some genetic problem or whatever. She said, your father has 3 of the 4 European markers, and you have all 4 of the European markers, which means your father's a honky and you're an even bigger honky than he is. Okay. Anyway, so this goes. But understand, as I said, DNA never proves anything except maybe in a paternity test. A very prominent national geneticist at the beginning of all this said he couldn't understand how anybody would use DNA in genealogy. And I don't agree with him on that, but I understand where he's coming from. So do be careful on that. But for example, my Native American ancestor turned out not to be female, but male. And he passed it on to his daughter, who was my grandmother's great-grandmother. Okay? So that's why the Native American DNA may not show up in my DNA. Also, we're talking about 200 years ago. And in 200 years ago, the DNA may not show up. They're only working with a sample of your DNA. They could easily miss the part of the DNA that has your Cherokee princess in it, or has Charlemagne in it, or all of this stuff. So of course you want to buy the most expensive search, the most extensive search that you can. But fear not, the science of DNA progresses almost by the day. And DNA tests within just a few years are going to be much more important and much more successful for us than they are right now. Oh, and I might add, there's one other form of DNA, and that's where they take your DNA and they reconstruct your grandparents and your ancestors with the DNA. You're saying, where do I sign up for that? Well, you can't, not yet. The reason is they can do it. It's not physically impossible. It's just we do not have the computer power to make it happen yet. However, in the near future, we're going to have such great computer power that will be another option for us, along with other new discoveries in DNA. Now, you also have in your collection of handouts something that is very, very strange as well. Very, very strange. And this is genealogical research you should not be pursuing. Or rather, this is research you should not, what am I trying to say here? These are places you should not go. It's like that old country and western song about looking for love in all the wrong places. This is the wrong places for looking for grandpa and your family tree. And we talk about those in that. When I was growing up, there was a place on Peachtree Street in Atlanta where you could go to, and it was a witch's cauldron. And you could go there and they could help you reach out and talk to your dead ancestors. Okay, even the great Harry Houdini had no problem discrediting that kind of research. Do not count on a seance. It's kind of like someone someone they had on Nova who was trying for many years to prove that there was ESP, that was physically possible. And he was disappointed every time. And he had a friend who in college to raise money did palm reading. And he thought he was pretty good at it until one day he realized he wasn't the person's palm he was reading, it was their face. And he could tell from their face the answers they wanted to their questions. Anyway, as that goes. Anyway, forget seances. Another thing that was very popular some years back was what they call birth order. And that is a child's personality is shaped by whether they're the first child, the second child, the third child, or to be more specific, the oldest male, the second oldest male, the third oldest male, the oldest female, second oldest female, whatever. We have books on this at Wallace State. And like I said, there were psychiatrists who actually betted their reputation on this. but they were wrong. And there are a lot of statistics that show, for example, almost all the astronauts were first born. Guess, however, how many astronauts were also only children, as this goes. But for everything in birth order that somebody's come up with, there's a statistical explanation that it's nonsense. Another thing that was popular was getting a sample of your ancestors' handwriting and determining your ancestors' personality based on the handwriting. No. It was handwriting experts, the ones who are witnesses in court, they were the ones who discredited that. All you can do in handwriting analysis is you can compare, say that there's a high probability this document was signed by the person who wrote this document. And here are the specific reasons for it. But you can't tell somebody's personality by the way they write. You can't even tell from their personality if they're having a good day or a bad day from their handwriting. There used to be a time, and maybe I can't do that now, but you could give me a sample of your handwriting, and I could tell you within a few years of when you were born. Now, how did I pull off that magic trick? Ma'am? That would be, yeah, absolutely, you're right about that. But here's how I would know that. Every few years, the national education system changed their writing style. And the teachers forced the children to write exactly alike based on what was the current writing style of that time. As that goes. Okay, now, there are some rather curious and strange, things that I do believe in. Not mind reading and not birth order or things of, the other thing here, the discarded research strategies, family fortunes. This is one of the great rackets of all time. And we have a good handout on this at Wallace State on family fortunes. I've published articles on it a few times. Over the years, there have been stories that there are fortunes being held in banks or whatever, and all you have to do is prove that you're the legal claimant, the heir to it, and all the money is yours. This little Spindletop oil well, Lower Manhattan, the Sir Francis Drake estate, and whatever. Anyway, none of this money exists. It's all fraud. It all makes for a good story, and it also makes for bad genealogy. As people will lie in their genealogy in hopes of getting a fortune that doesn't exist. Now, that does not mean that when you get home tonight, somebody might not call you and tell you that you have money in a bank in Chicago or an insurance company in Los Angeles, and that doesn't mean they're committing fraud. And over the last 30 years, there's been a huge, huge industry in finding unclaimed estates, unclaimed insurance policies, and then getting that money to the people who are entitled to it for a percentage, of course. Now, how do you tell what's fraud and what's not? Very simple test. If the person on the other side of the phone says, no, I don't want you to pay me anything. When we prove that you are entitled to the money, I want 1/3 of it. And here's how we'll work that out. Or I want 1/10 of whatever. I want a certain percentage of it. That's where I get my payday. And you may think that's wrong, but on the other hand, think of it this way. You're getting 2/3 and you wouldn't have been getting anything if this person had not called. If they say, well, we need some money up front, that's when you hang up. That's when it's a fraud. Okay, moving right along. The thing I do believe in, however, not genetic memories or angels or demons. I do believe in luck. And I do not believe in coincidence exactly. But I've seen some amazing things that appeared to be coincidence, or maybe somebody from beyond the grave was helping me. And they really weren't. They really were not with this. What it was, when you take it apart step by step, you begin to wonder, how is it I didn't find this person? I did not find this source before when I should have. What I'm trying to say is often what looks like a coincidence is not a coincidence. But I do believe in luck. There are days, I swear to you, you could take me into my library, ask me a question, blindfold me, spin me around, and I think completely blindfolded, I could pull a book off the shelf that would answer your question. And no, I'm not going to email you when I'm having one of those days. Okay. On the other hand, there are days I swear I couldn't find the floor under my feet. Now, what is the point of even bringing that up? The point is, look for your good, be prepared for your good days. As Garrison Keillor used to tell us, be prepared for your good days. Be all ready for when you are in the right place and the right time and the stars are shining on you to make the most of it, Be prepared for your good days. Okay. Now, let's talk a little bit about what to do with your research, Okay, let me hit on a few other things I probably meant to discuss earlier, and they are included in your handout. As I explained before, many people think that everything is recorded at the courthouse. Our ancestors saw things very differently. There were people who lived long and happy lives who never saw a courthouse and who never filled out an official record of any sort. Then there are people whose records were kept in courthouses that were burned. Alabama has a really bad habit of not burned courthouses so much as people borrowing records from the courthouse over the years and never bringing them back. And we have no idea where those records are. And then there are just people who bought land and sold land and they just never got around to recording the deed. Or they got married and the preacher said, you kids just get on about your business and such. I will take your marriage license to the courthouse next time I'm in town. 50 years later, when the preacher is dead, they find all these marriage licenses in a pile in a back room. As this goes. And then, of course, there are even counties that have thrown out records, and the records are lost by that means. So now, on a similar stretch, we'll be talking about military records another time here. We'll be talking about military records and how to use them in your family research. Military records are looked down upon, but they should not be. As frequently, the military records can be a gold mine of personal information. And that leads me to a point that I discussed earlier with you. And that is, I said, look for everybody in the family. As you're going back in your family tree, be sure to look for brothers and sisters. Be sure to look for brothers and sisters and the information they have. Let's say you had an ancestor, and all the federal census records show is that your ancestor was born in 1832, more or less, in South Carolina, probably, okay? But you look up his married sister, and his married sister, who was also born in South Carolina, she shows up in one of those census records that gives you the county of birth. And she was born in 1834 in Lexington District, South Carolina. So whereas your ancestor was born in 1832, her brother, most likely born Lexington County, South Carolina. Your ancestors' census records say that he was born in South Carolina. You pull up his Civil War service, his Confederate service record, and it's a disaster. It's two little cards that show that at one point he was in the unit, but that's about it, okay? You look up his brother's Confederate service record, and his brother got a medical discharge from the Confederacy, and in that medical discharge, it gives his county and state of birth. I mean, even if your ancestor was not actually born in that county, it tells you where to look for the family. and particularly if the family's last name is Smith or Jones or Davis or Williamson or something like that. Alabama, for example, has a 1907 census of its Confederate veterans, and they ask each Confederate veteran, what county and what state were you born in? And that is a gold mine for research. Many African Americans in Alabama joined the Union Army. And when they joined the Union Army, their service record gives county and state of birth. And then their pension records gives you more information. It is sometimes, and I don't mean to get your hopes up, but there's sometimes you can take a black family 2 or 3 generations back in slavery, thanks to the Union Civil War military records. Okay, now, as I say, what do we do about, some other things I wanted to mention here. Land grant records. Everybody, just like everybody wants to know what their ancestors did in the military or whatever, people also want to know about land grants, Where were they the first settler of or whatever? Okay, we have a handout here on federal land records that's in your packet with you. Every state in this country is either a federal land state or it is not. Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina, Kentucky are not federal land states. If you want to find out about land grants or land that was granted to your family, check the respective state archives in those states. Texas is not a federal land state. If you want to find out about land grants in Texas, contact the Texas State Land Office. Fine folks there too, I should add. But most of the rest of the country are federal land states. Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, Florida, or Missouri are all federal land states. That means the land was granted by the federal government, And there are several ways your ancestor could have gotten this land from the federal government. First off, your ancestor might have gotten it from the King of Spain or France before there was an Alabama, and there will be records of that. And then up until 1862, your ancestor could have bought the land, maybe in payments, maybe even on credit. And if your ancestor served in the military between 1842 and 1855, your ancestor, their next of kin, whatever, could have received federal military bounty land. We'll talk about that when we cover military records. And that can be a world of good genealogical information. Starting in 1862, every head of household was entitled to free federal land. Didn't matter what color you were, did not matter if you were male or female, only that you were the head of the household. You would live on the land for so many years, and then the federal government would give you the land. This was called homesteading. And if you were African American and you could not find the land that you wanted in Alabama, then you could go out west and claim the land, and that was called being an exeter. As I say, we have a handout on federal lands, but these records are kept by the National Archives and the Bureau of Land Management. Okay, now, as I said, get back to quickly what it is that what do you do with your material? Okay, my father was the only member of my family who was interested in the family tree unless there was money involved. And so every time I go off on one of my field trips, I'd come back and talk with him, and we'd share information back and forth. My father would share what he remembered growing up, and it was wonderful. One of the few things he and I ever did together. I so wanted to put my family together for him, but he died before I had the chance. But it turned out he'd done that for me. He had, before he died, gone out with my sister and secretly told her everything he knew about the family. And she typed this up and gave it to me. The year after my father died, my family had its first family reunion since my grandparents had passed. I pulled together all my family information that I could on my father's family, put it in recognizable order, went down to quick copy, and had them make me 50 copies bound of it, and I gave it out at my family reunion. And I was very popular that year. And my great Aunt Mott, who was one of the last of my father's many siblings, she comes up to me and she was dying. And she put her arm around me at the next family reunion. And she said, you know, Bobby, my whole life I wanted to know the family story, and nobody told me anything. And you handed it to me. And I swear to you, that was the best hug I've ever gotten. So anyway, what I'm trying to say is you don't have to write Angela's ashes. You don't have to write roots. You can just put your information together and then leave it for your family members when you've got enough of it to have made it worthwhile. And of course, include pictures. It has never been easier, thanks to computers and such, to do everything from just a handout to give out at a family reunion to publishing Angela's ashes or something like that. Don't expect to make money off of it. This is definitely a labor of love. Definitely a labor of love. Now, that's all well and good and such, but there are other things you can do as well. You can write articles for genealogical journals. You find some really good records that nobody knows about, like records of the Union soldiers from Sylacauga, Alabama. Write it up as an article for the nearest genealogical journal or for the state Alabama Genealogical Society journal. Nothing wrong with that. Nice thing about, or let's say you found something really interesting on your family. Write it up as an article for the appropriate historical journal. And genealogical journal, and don't be the least bit surprised if people contact you with more information. Along the way, you're going to find a lot of interesting stories while you're researching your family tree. I have done that. My great-great-grandfather, who was a moonshining vigilante for one. I've stumbled into many great stories, and I published them in scholarly journals. And you could do so too. There was a woman, and she went to do research. And as she was going out the door to do research, her father called out to her, "Ask him about that court case where I was on the jury that executed the King of Georgia." And in all the time she'd interviewed him, he never mentioned this. And I'm going to cut this story really short. She asked about it at the courthouse where she was at, and she became so intrigued with the court case he was talking about that she later wrote a book about it. And the book became such a wild success that they made a made-for-TV movie out of it with Andy Griffith and Johnny Cash, Murder in Coweta County, which started out as a genealogy quest to a courthouse. So who knows what you might find or where what you've discovered might take you on that. Frank McCork, he just wanted to put down for the family his memories of his mother. And of course, he ends up getting the Pulitzer Prize for Angela's ashes. And so I'm not promising that something like that might not be in your future, but it's certainly something to think about. Some questions. You'll have to, I've got it written down, but you'll have to ask the librarians and they will tell you. Yes, there's 2 in March and then there's 1 in April. And I think the next one is either Southern Research or Military Research. Yes, sir. Do what, ma'am? Researching in the South, yes. And then Military Research. Yes, sir. Well, I hope you'll come and visit us again at Wallace State. We're now over half the genealogy collection is now over half of the college's library. And we have some of the nicest people I've ever known to help you. And if they can't solve your problem, they'll go back into my work area and wake me up. And oh, Salt Lake City, I apologize. Oh, you're saying all those nice things. I'm half deaf. I thought you were talking about my library. Salt Lake's library is great too, but I have to warn you about using their library. Do not stand in the middle of the room looking puzzled. or you will be trampled to death by all these people who are running to help you. I mean, they'll just fall over themselves to help you in your family tree and the research. Another good question.
I just want to make a comment that the Aniston Library is a good library.
Do what, ma'am?
The Aniston Library.
The Aniston Public Library in Calhoun County is super. It is a super library. In fact, I spoke there a month or two back. Yeah, they have a fabulous collection there and a very good one. Also nearby, another collection, but you need to check for the days that it's open, is the Nicholson Library in Gaddis, just in Etowah County, the next county over. Nicholson Library. Every few years, they try to persuade the county commissioners. They want to build an entire research complex around the Nicholson Library, which will have a county archives and the public library and the Nicholson Library all there together, and maybe a Jack's too. But, do what, ma'am?
Sanford Library.
Yes, the Sanford Library is good too. In addition to a good general collection, they also are the great archives for Alabama Baptist. And they have microfilm of hundreds of church records of hundreds of Alabama churches, not all of which are Baptist by a long shot. If it's an Alabama church, they would microfilm the church records, and so they have a spectacular collection of that. But especially if you had Baptist ancestors, be sure to check with Sanford. But we have so many great libraries here in Alabama, we really do. And of course, at Wallace State, we have a handout on great libraries to see in Alabama and surrounding states. And you really have to live, what am I trying to say here? You really have to have lived somewhere else for a while to appreciate what we have here in Alabama. For example, west of the Mississippi, there's a great library in Salt Lake, and there's a pretty good genealogical library in Denver. And as far as I know, that's about it. And I mean, we do better than that within 50 miles of Birmingham here. Some more great questions. All right, well, I want to thank you for being a wonderful audience. I want to thank you for coming.
Thank y'all for coming as well. I'm Tracy Thomas, the director here at the library, and I did get to come to the end today. We had a funeral to go to, but I did want to mention the dates. I know somebody was just asking. The next one will be March the 11th, then there's one March the 25th. There's some flyers right here that have the dates on them if y'all want to grab one on your way out. We're trying to space them out one a month through now through April, but we have to do two in March, so we'll skip February and two in March. But please do call and sign up so we can kind of gauge our space in the room. But do know that we did live stream this to our YouTube page. It is recorded, so you can go back and check it again later if there are any resources feature that you want to go back and watch or somebody you want to share that with. So thank you all, and I want to give you your check while you're
Oh,
here.
thank you.
Before I forget that.
Oh, let's not
Thank you so
forget
much for
that.
being here
Thank you,
as
ma'am.
well. Thank you. Did you have a question, Mr. Captain?
No, you said your tree is active. Well, let's say, being from the only black, a whole lot of our history is not as far back as y'all might think. I can show you some stuff. My friend is Judy. You know her?
She's my cousin.
She's the reason I'm here. But generally, with black history, our ancestors were slaves. They would not be in the 1860 census back, not in it as your ancestors were. They'd be in it as slaves, and their names will not be there. It will require you to go and look at, yes, their names will not be there. As long as you list as male, female, and age, black or mulatto. Mulatto at that time in all dictionaries meant your father or grandfather was white. Later, the modern dictionary now parent, or the parent was white, or grandparent. So back then, you never did. But, well, if it was a male, black male, his father was white, his father was white, and we can get into that. But anyway, what I did was I had, because of my research constantly at the Shelby County Archives, they started digitizing slave records, which meant, and I know they got this from Charles Genealogy, unless you ancestors were slave owners. But it meant that I was able to find the actual owners of my ancestors. And it turns out that what I had been told, my family had been told by Census, who I got to meet when I was 6 years old. Granddaughter showed up at the house. And I'll tell you this so it'll be a little funny. Two elderly white women showed up at our doorstep. I was about 6 years old. I went to the door. Oh, okay, I run back in that door. Mama, she comes to the doorstep. And to the door, and she said, yes, ma'am, what can we do for you? She said, we're the granddaughter of Dr. W.R. Singer. And I said, my mom said, oh, okay, yeah, I know. He sold his great-grandfather's land. He said, y'all still have all the land? She said, yeah. That's a great-grandson, pointed at me, that's a grandson out there. And one of his daughters still lives down in next door. Y'all still have the land? Yes, ma'am. Now, this was sold to us in 1879. And the combination block. And the lady heard it, when you heard it, they were just screaming and hollering, and mama panicked because, okay, I'm gonna tell y'all this, you might not be able to know it, but two elderly white women screaming and hollering on the doorstep ain't a good thing in the South. And she said, what did I do? I just told you what you wanted to know. And she said, oh, everything's wonderful, everything's wonderful. And they calmed down. She said, well, come on in. She said, why are you here? She said, our grandfather made us promise him multiple times while he was on his deathbed that before we died, we'd come back here and see if Albert Baker's descendants kept the land. And she said, well, why did you do that? She said, they were the best of friends. And he told them that Albert and him were the best of friends, that Albert Baker was one of the best friends too. He wanted to make sure that his family survived. And so I come to find out that his Dr. W.R. Singer father owned my great-grandfather Albert Baker and his parents. And that Albert Baker and Dr. W.R. Singer, John Singer's son, Dr. Johnson's son, was about the same age. So yeah, they grew up together and became best friends. You never can't tell what you will see. Like he was talking about Aunt Maud was talking to us, but what had happened, my mother never let me forget that. Don't